Donald March. I'm the president of Mamaroneck's Historical Society, and I'd like to welcome you all here this evening. Brendan Gill wrote a wonderful piece on the Wingfoot Golf Club, which is where we sit this evening. In that piece, he said, for the sheer number of trees and the variety of species, the most remarkable golf course arboretum that I know of is Wingfoot. Wingfoot is ours. It belongs to our community. It's part of our community. It's perhaps one of the most interesting places we've ever had the pleasure of taking an LMC-TV video camera. And I welcome you all here tonight for a program that's been a year and a half in the making, the history of Wingfoot. On my right, at the extreme end, is Douglas LaRue Smith, who happened to write this book, Wingfoot, the Wingfoot story. He's the author of this book and the historian of the Wingfoot Club. Immediately to my right is Mr. Bill Morley, who is the club's secretary. And I'd like to begin this evening by asking Mr. Morley to begin a chronological history of the Wingfoot property, how the golf club unfolded, and where the golf club will be in our community's history in the immediate future. Mr. Morley.
Thank you. We traced the earliest history of the ownership of the property back as far as 1868, at which point the property known as Altonwood was owned by one Thomas R. Hawley. Altonwood was his property, and the entranceway to it was from Old White Plains Road. At that point in time, Fenimore Road, as we know it today, and before Fenimore Road, it was known as Grand Park Avenue, did not exist. And also Altonwood, if you go out the rear entranceway of our property to Old White Plains Road, on each column inscribed is the word Altonwood. It's still there. The Hawley family apparently held the property from 1868 through 1891, as we can best determine. And we don't know how big the parcel was during that time. However, in 1891, the property was acquired by the Parker family. The owner of record was Charles Warren Parker, and at that time the property grew to 675 acres. A descendant of the Parker family, who was Chief Justice of the New York State Court of Appeals, and also ran unsuccessfully for the presidency against Teddy Roosevelt in 1904, was Alton Brooks Parker. And Don is holding a photograph of Mr. Parker in his hand. Mr. Parker's running mate in 1904 was H.G. Davis, and they ran against Teddy Roosevelt and Charles W. Fairbanks, and they were unsuccessful. At which, following that point, Mr. Parker practiced law in New York City with the firm of Parker, Marshall, Millar, and Auchincloss. And as we've determined, he also lived here on the grounds of what is now Wingfoot, on the estate, the Altonwood, of 675 acres, which consisted of 8 buildings. And we also learned that there were two buildings, or 2 estates, if you will, on the property, one of which is under the foundation of this very clubhouse here, and the other one is around our 8 West Green. I was given a photograph this evening of Altonwood Park as the property became known around 1915, and it shows a little pond with a high elevation to the right, and it's the first time we saw the photograph this evening, and it looks exactly like our 3rd hole on the east course. If you will, the green is elevated in the back today, and then where the water is the fairway leading up to the green. That's what Mr. Smith and I have determined. Following the Parker ownership, which again ran from 1891 to 1911, the property was acquired by Walter H. Bennett. At that point, the land consisted of 700 acres. In 1913, the property was transferred to the Mamaroneck Heights Company, Incorporated, 128 Broadway, New York City, with W.H. Bennett as the treasurer. So it obviously remained in the Bennett family, or a company that he established with some others, because there was one H.A. Metz was the vice president, and the Altonwood Park property then became, or grew to 847 acres, and it was in their control until 1922. Following that, at that point, a golf course, the New York Athletic Club was seeking to establish a golf course for their members. And many golf clubs, active and established, were offered for sale to the New York AC. Among the clubs whose purchase was considered were the Fox Hills Golf Club and the Metropolitan Golf Club, now known as Quaker Ridge, across the street from us. In early 1921, much time was devoted to visiting properties that were suitable for a golf course, and when the investigation was completed, a meeting of the New York AC members was called, and there were 100 individuals in attendance. The meeting elected a committee of 11 with the power to organize a golf club. The site in question was looked upon as probably the best of many considerations. The stumbling block in the path of securing the property was the attitude of its owners, who held a parcel of 847 acres and wanted to sell all or none. Altonwood Park, a private estate with winding bridle paths, a half-mile racetrack, and 2 fine mansions, as I mentioned before, one of which stood on the site of this clubhouse. Additionally, the property before the Parkers and the Hawleys was a battlefield during the Indian Wars, we're told, and during construction of this clubhouse, stone arrowheads were found by workmen building the courses, as were early English and German coins. The site also served as a camping ground during the Revolution, and the land was located across the street, as you know, across Fenimore Road from James Fenimore Cooper's homestead. On May 15, 1922, C.C. Lewis and Brothers purchased 280 acres of land, 280 acres of land from the Mamaroneck Heights Company, and the same day transferred this 280 acres to the Wingfoot Holding Company. Between 1922 and 1957, Wingfoot's land increased to 288 acres. Shortly thereafter, construction began on the golf courses. There were 24,000 cubic yards of earth moved in building the greens. 7,200 tons of rock were blasted to create fairways and bunkers. 7,800 trees of less than 6 inches in diameter were cut down. 25,000 feet of water pipe was laid for irrigating the greens and trees. 10.5 tons of Kentucky blue, red top, and fescue grass seed was sown in the fairways and among the trees, and 3.5 tons of bent, fescue, and red top grass seed were planted in the greens. The construction force comprised 220 men, 60 teams, and 19 tractors. Artesian wells were sunk 500 feet. Wingfoot Golf Club was officially incorporated August 5, 1921, and the certificate of incorporation was signed by our founding fathers. The purchase price of the 280 acres and the cost to construct the 36 holes of golf that we have here today, including the clubhouse, totaled $750,000. It's quite a sum. When Wingfoot Golf Club was originally founded, it was separate and distinct from the New York Athletic Club. However, at one time, there was a two-club requirement, but that ended, and there was never a legal tie between the two entities. The club was officially opened on June 16, 1923, and the first foursome to play was Charles C. Noble's president, Fred E. Williamson, Edward L. Engel, and F.C. Gabriel. The golf courses were designed by Albert W. Tillinghast, known as Tilly. Mr. Tillinghast learned his craft from old Tom Morris at St. Andrews in Scotland. He also designed many famous golf courses and redesigned Baldwin, the site of the 1993 U.S. Open, and Quaker Ridge across the street. Doug, would you like to add a little bit about Mr. Tillinghast?
Yes, thank you. I'll make this brief. My great spouse sitting over there on the side, on your right, and that beautiful flaming red hair, says historians are notable for their wanting to talk. They once get started, they don't know how to stop. And she reminds me of that all the time, and just like this minister you may have heard about, who had this penchant for talking. He just loved the sound of his own voice, and he would go on and on and on. So one day at a service, at a Sunday, there was a lady from out of town visiting, and when she was leaving, the minister was out there shaking hands with everybody, like ministers do, and she shook hands, and then she said, Reverend, what is that bronze plaque that I see on the wall behind you? And he turned around and looked, he said, well, that's the name of the people who have passed on, our members who passed on in the service. And she said, oh, really? 9:30 or 11 o'clock? So I'll keep it, so I'll try to avoid falling into that pit. Actually, Tillinghast, A.W. Tillinghast was considered to be the great American golf architect. In 1974, when the United States Golf Association put out their publication just prior to the U.S. Open that was held here that year, Frank Hannigan, the executive director, wrote a great story calling it the great forgotten golf architect, A.W. Tillinghast, and went on to talk about him. He designed over 100 golf courses. He was quite an old rascal, really. And there were times, there's some great stories about him. We interviewed his grandson, who is a doctor on the Mayo Clinic, and we said we're going to leave the things out about what an old roue the rascal was, and he said, oh, you can't do that, you got to put it in there. We didn't, and I think he's probably glad we didn't, in view of some of the things we found out about him. However, he was literally, and it's a fair statement, a genius at knowing how to take the land and shape it. And remember now that in the days when 1923, when this course opened, they were working with, as Billy described, very primitive equipment. And all these greens that you see here today, whenever you visited, were literally handmade. Today they go out with bulldozers and all kinds of fancy earth-moving equipment. But A.W. Tillinghast did those things with one man and a horse and a mule and a scoop, and going around and shaping them just like a sculptor would fashion a piece of marble into a statue of some kind. And there's no question about it that he was, without any question, the greatest of all American golf architects. And here's the thing to keep in mind. After building 100 of them in his career, when they was all finished, he said, the two finest courses I ever designed were those at Wingfoot Golf Club.
Thank you, Doug. Our clubhouse was designed by Charles Wendeheck, who chose the English scholastic style for the building blocks of the edifice, which came from the grounds, and the stone fences, etc. Doug, would you like to add a little bit to that?
Yeah, thank you. Charles Wendeheck, then, and coming right along after A.W. Tillinghast, was the foremost clubhouse architect of the 1920s, beginning in the late teens, in fact. And the thing that I think was interesting about the man was that it was called the golden age of golf architecture. And that applies both to the golf courses and then also to these clubhouses. And in the book we have, you can see the great edifices, the wonderful buildings that he designed. And the thing that I think I would like to tell you about, after having said that Tillinghast considered the two golf courses he built as the finest that he ever designed, Charles Wendeheck, when he was all finished with his career, referred to this clubhouse as what he felt was the classic design of what is known as English scholastic. And if you can see the early pictures of it, some of it has been altered in the back and so on, as we had to extend for the dining room and also for the kitchen and for the mixed grill over there. But it's one exquisite form of architecture, and it's the finest example that he's had of his own work, Mr. Charles Wendeheck.
Here is a, Doug, here is a photograph taken in 1923, which we just had framed, of the golf course when it opened and the clubhouse that you were talking about. This is a wonderful old photograph, and we hope to display it in a prominent place in the building shortly. Thank you, Don. Wingfoot has hosted many famous tournaments over the years. In 1929, we hosted our first U.S. Open, and Bobby Jones won the event. However, Bobby Jones sank a famous life-saving putt on the 18th West to tie Al Espinosa, forcing a 36-hole playoff the following day, which Bobby won by 23 strokes. This putt is called one of the greatest shots in golf history, causing Grantland Rice, the top sports writer of the day, to say, "I will always believe that Bobby's future great career hung on that putt." Well, in 1930, Bobby Jones won the Grand Slam. Doug, you have a great photograph of Bobby Jones teeing off on the 18th hole, which I would like to show everybody. And if you can see this, here is Bobby Jones on the tee, and right behind him, it's hard for you to see, but I'll tell you, there's a man kneeling down with a cigar hanging out of his mouth. It's Babe Ruth. So
How long was the putt?
It was a 12-foot putt. In 1940, the U.S. Amateur was held at Wingfoot Golf Club. The winner was Dick Chapman, one of our fine amateurs of the day, a Wingfoot member, and incidentally, Wingfoot's first junior member. After the war, the Walker Cup matches were resumed and came back to us in 1949, with the U.S. team winning over Great Britain 10-2. In 1946, I skipped a few years, pardon me, Wingfoot, in fact, we just realized this in the last 6 months. We found some old photographs upstairs in the attic, which I would like to show you. This large one here. Wingfoot hosted the good old round robin in May 30th to June 2nd, 1946. And this is one of the earliest tournaments that took place after World War II. It's a good old round robin at Wingfoot Golf Club. And shown here are Sam Snead, Ben Hogan, Fred Corcoran, Lloyd Mangrum, Jug McSpaden, Byron Nelson, Claude Harmon, Dick Burton, Dutch Harrison, Vic Gezzi, shown on the tee, and other contestants not shown are Lawson Little, Jimmy Demerit, Jimmy Hines, Bob Hamilton, Sam Bird, and Herman Barron. In 1954, 25 years after Bobby Jones won the U.S. Open at Wingfoot, Wingfoot honored Mr. Jones and conferred honorary membership on him. To commemorate the event, Tommy Armour, Craig Wood, Gene Saracen, and Johnny Farrell played a 9-hole exhibition on the West Course. Mr. Jones followed the players in Wingfoot's first golf cart, driven by Claude Harmon. At this time, Bobby Jones was in leg braces. After they finished the 18th hole, they asked Mr. Jones where the hole was located on the green when he sunk the famous 12-foot putt in 1929. Mr. Jones pointed, and the greenskeeper created a hole on the green where the cup was in 1929, and Mr. Jones then pointed to where the ball was. The 4 players I just mentioned all tried to sink the putt, and they all missed. Claude Harmon tried the putt, he missed. Joe Dye tried, and he missed. Finally, they turned to Mr. Jones and asked if he would like to try the putt, at which point he said, No thanks, I already made it. Okay, in 1959, the U.S. Open was again, I'm sorry, I skipped a very important event. The ladies' turn came next. In 1957, the first USGA Women's Open was held at Wingfoot Golf Club. The first at Wingfoot, I should say. It was held on the East Course. It was won by Jackie Pung, but only briefly. Sadly, she had signed the wrong scorecard, and the victory went to Betsy Rawls. In one of golf's most magnificent gestures, our members took up a special purse and presented it to Jackie as a tribute to her fine play and her sportsmanship. The purse exceeded the actual prize money of the tournament. In 1959, the U.S. Open again returned to Wingfoot, our second U.S. Open. Billy Casper was the winner, averaging 28.5 putts per round in his score of 282, 2 over par, and so forth. In 1972, the USGA Women's Open returned, and this time Susie Maxwell Burning was victorious in some fine play. The U.S. Open returned for the third time in 1974, with Hale Irwin, the winner, over a fine field with a score of 287, which was 7 over par at that time. Arnold Palmer and Tom Watson gave some fine challenge going down to the end, but Hale held firm. The first USGA Senior Open was held on the East Course in 1980 with one of the game's fine gentlemen, Roberto Di Vincenzo, the victor at 285. In 1984, once again, Wingfoot was honored by having the USGA, the U.S. Open, our fourth U.S. Open. This was another exciting tournament which led to a climatic playoff, this time between Fuzzy Zeller and Greg Norman, reminiscent of 1929. Greg sank a difficult putt on 18 West, similar to Bobby Jones's 55 years ago in 1929, for a tie at 276, thus forcing an 18-hole playoff the next day that Fuzzy won by 8 strokes in a superb round of 67. When Greg sank that putt, the crowd erupted in a roar, and Fuzzy, still out on the fairway, thought for a moment, erroneously, that Greg had won and waved his white towel in surrender. But it was for a tie, leading to the playoff. These great events led Dave Anderson, senior sports editor of the New York Times, to say in his column in 1984, "Wingfoot is golf and golf is Wingfoot," to which Wingfooters everywhere heartily agreed. Okay, now, the Wingfoot for the last 60 years has had his own fine national tournament, the John G. Anderson Memorial Invitational 4-Bowl Tournament. Doug, would you like to add anything about
Well, I think John G. Anderson, for whom it is named, was a very early member, an original member of what they called the Noble 600, first members of the Wingfoot Golf Club. And he was a 5-time club champion. And he also won the French Open, and he ran very close to winning a couple of times in the British Open. But the interesting thing about the man is that he was an early historian and fine writer himself about golf. And some fine articles still exist that he wrote back in those early days. He did die fairly young, not too far into the 1930s. And this was established then in his memory. And many people consider it the finest 4-ball amateur tournament in the country today. The professionals, as you know, have taken over really with great publicity they got on TV and everything. But for the amateurs, it stands high still in golf.
And Doug, going along with what you're saying, I think it's fair to say that the Anderson draws the top amateurs from across the United States and is considered by many to be the best amateur 4-ball event in the country. The professionals at Wingfoot. Our first pro in 1923 was Don Mackey, one of the original organizers of the Professional Golfers Association of America in 1916, as was A.W. Tillinghast and John G. Anderson. Dan returned to the commercial golf equipment side in 1924, and Mike Brady came on board to serve for 15 years, our first longtime pro and a man of high talent. He was runner-up in the Open of 1911 and tied with Walter Hagen in the Open in 1919, but lost in the playoff by 1 stroke. He was elected to the PGA Hall of Fame in 1960. In 1939, Craig Wood was our next professional. He is a legendary figure, not only at Wingfoot, but in the history of the game, having won both the U.S. Open and the Masters in 1941. With a host of victories around the country to his credit, he served Wingfoot very well. In 1945, he was succeeded by his assistant at the time, Claude Harmon. Claude reigned as our top pro for 33 years and was widely regarded for his teaching skills as well as a player, having won the Masters in 1948. Many top players came to him when they needed help with their game, and 3 American presidents sought his advice during his years at Wingfoot. Presidents Eisenhower, Kennedy, and Ford. Even the King of Morocco came to him for advice and instruction. Claude is also for instruction. Claude is also remembered for the fine teaching staff he brought to Wingfoot, notable names indeed, such as Jackie Burke Jr., Harry D., Rod Funsett, Dave Marr, Dick Mayer, Shelley Mayfield, Al Mengert, and Mike Suchek. Incidentally, Claude Harmon holds the record to this date on both the East and West courses with a 62. In 1978, Tom Neaporti came to us as our next professional, and Tom is still with us today. He's a gentleman of the highest teaching skills, having won the Bob Hope Desert Classic in 1967 and other tournaments, beginning with his championship days at Ohio State University. He is still sought by today's leading players, both men and women, when their game needs some touching up. His devotion to Wingfoot and our members has won him the respect and affection of all. There are other people that have been around Wingfoot during the years. Tommy Armour, there's Silver Scott. Tommy won the PGA, he won the British Open, and many other tournaments. He was a member of Wingfoot, and he won the Canadian Open. He was an institution here for many years. Another great gentleman was Fred Corcoran, who was a member. He lived on the 15th hole, right off the green, 15 West. His wife still lives there. Fred was tournament director of the International Golf Association, the Ladies PGA Association, 1948 to 1960, the PGA, 1936 to 1947, manager of 2 Ryder Cup teams, and was a pioneer manager of athletes. For example, he was the manager of Sam Snead, Tony Jacklin, Tony Lima in golf, Stan Musial, and Ted Williams in baseball. We today have some very, very well-known golfers here at Wingfoot, with the late Joseph F. Gagliardi, Judge Gagliardi, former mayor of Larchmont, state Supreme Court judge, administrative judge, club champion at Wingfoot, was runner-up in the U.S. Amateur in 1951. We have a photograph, Doug. I'd like to. Here is a picture of, on the right, of Judge Gagliardi, known as Joe Gagliardi. On his left is Ed Vaughn, former president of Wingfoot, and also club champion many years ago. We also have a father and son that accomplished quite a bit in golf at Wingfoot. And here is their photograph. Mark J. Stewart Sr., who won the club championship 5 times, and his son, Mark J. Stewart Jr., known as Buddy Stewart, has won the club championship 6 times at Wingfoot. And they live right outside the grounds of the club. I'd like to now talk about the 10 West at Wingfoot, which is considered to be one of our finest holes and a very famous hole in golf. And maybe, Doug, you can give a little insight to the people about the hole, our great hole.
Thank you. You look to your right, over here on the easel, is a painting of Golf 10, our 10 West, right here at the end of the table. And I call your attention to the beauty of this painting. It was done by who I think is the finest golf course and golf hole artist today, a lady down at Hilton Head, South Carolina, by the name of Linda Hartow. And this painting that you see here, the detail of it is so great, but it's one of 18 holes that Jack Nicklaus is bringing out in a book on the 18, in his opinion, the finest 18 holes of golf in the world. And she is painting them all. And so she came here last year, took a lot of pictures, and my wife and I visited her in her studio, and it's fascinating to see how she works, because she takes a lot of pictures, a good many, with a camera, and then mounts them on the side of a wall, and goes over each one of them in great detail, finding the little points of interest. And here she even preserved the squirrel that appears just in the front on the tee. It's a very handsome painting. This golf hole that you see here is one of probably the top of the most, say, 5 most photographed golf holes in the world. And the only ones that surpass it would be at St. Andrews in Scotland, Pebble Beach that you all see because it's so grand on that ocean coast, Cypress Point, Augusta National, their 13th hole, and then you'd find this hole is there. Here's one of the great things about it. A.W. Tillinghast saying that the 2 golf courses he designed were the finest that he designed. He said this was the finest par 3 that he designed, and out of 100 golf courses, that would mean he had about 400 par 3s that he designed. So that's the tribute from Mr. Tillinghast himself about our 10 West.
Thank you, Doug. Wingfoot also hosted the Ike Tournament in 1963, and I remember I was here actually that day, and here's a picture of President Eisenhower with our president at the time, Joan Scovern, shown on the upper deck of the building. Additionally, Wingfoot, we had a member back in the 1930s that started his golfing career in Montreal. His name was David Mulligan. When he came to New York, he was the president of the Biltmore Hotel. And Mr. David Mulligan is famous for, quote-unquote, the Mulligan on the golf course. He was a legend at Wingfoot, and he was a legend across the United States and around the world. He had an ongoing match at Wingfoot, I'm told, with one Frank McEwen, who was president of the Pennsylvania Hotel. So I guess the president of 2 hotels were playing for the real estate. We had a member here who took up golf at age 50. His name was Dr. Gus Zimmerman. He was Babe Ruth's dentist. In this very dining room some years ago, about 10, 12 years ago, there was a dinner in his honor to celebrate his 100th birthday. He stood up and he thanked everybody for coming, and he said he wanted to introduce his twin sons to the audience, at which point he said, "Stand up, boys," and at which point both sons stood up and he said, "They're both 78 years old." Incidentally, Dr. Zimmerman passed away at age 103. He fell off a bicycle in Florida. Wingfoot also was famous for the elm tree at 10 East. And Doug, I'd like you to please tell our fine audience about the elm tree, which is pictured over there.
Very good. I forgot to mention one thing about 10 West, the picture over here. If you were watching your television last Sunday afternoon at 3 o'clock on ABC-TV, it was the second Sunday in a row on their selection of golf's Grade 18. And this was featured as the very first hole shown as they opened the program this past Sunday afternoon. So that's just one more bit of evidence of how highly acclaimed 10 West is. The Great Elm, and right up here you'll see it preserved forever in this mural. That has been here now about 15 years, I believe, and we certainly hope it's going to be there forever. because now this great, great tree is gone. Here's the other picture of it over here in the window. A very interesting art treatment here. A Canadian firm reproduces this mechanically, and you'll see how realistic it looks. It looks like an oil painting. It was known as the greatest tree in golf. First called that about 15 years ago by the famous golf writer Dan Jenkins, and it did have that name. It shows up in many, many, many books. Wingfoot spent many thousands of dollars over the years trying to save that tree, which did have the Dutch elm disease. But last fall, as we say, it bit the dust and had to come down. This is the way it looked, however, and the way it was presented in February of this year by Dave Anderson, the senior sports writer of the New York Times. The death of golf's greatest tree is a fine tribute that he paid to it, and was the dominant sports story in the Sunday issue of this past February when it appeared. It has had a great deal of affection that went into it, as well as a lot of money, and was a sad, sad day indeed when it went down. Now, I do have something here which you might like to see if you want to come up afterwards and look at it. The Alpine Tree Service people who tried so valiantly to save it for us took it down, and they gave us this book. It's an album, really, of the step-by-step as they took it down. It's all in color, a series of photos, how they came up with a crane, took the first branches down, and then more and more and more until finally it was taken down entirely. And we are taking certain elements of it, pieces of it, and are making artifacts. We're going to use some of it to make a tabletop and so on. A lady over here had a question.
How old was it?
We think it was 126 years old, but we're still checking it out.
Actually, it was when it was cut down to the base, we discovered that there were at the original base there were two trees that grew together as one. There were two sets of rings.
You can see.
Yeah. So, okay, thank you. Additionally, this year, Golf Digest magazine has just informed Wingfoot that our West Course is now ranked number 7 in America's greatest 100 golf courses. And the East Course is now ranked number 24. Golf Magazine recently ranks our West Course as number 10 in the United States and number 17 in the world.
I might just say that this plaque is really a Golf Digest puts this out showing the 100 greatest golf courses, and in the top 10 over here you'll see Wingfoot mentioned. You might come up and look at this later if you wish to. But again, it one more bit of evidence of the high regard, the acclaim that is given to our West Course and to our East.
There are many fine photographs in our clubhouse, which unfortunately we cannot bring to the table this evening, but please feel free to take a look at them in the hallway and in our library behind the fireplace. In the cocktail lounge, you'll see the winners of the U.S. Opens and the other major events that took place here. We were very fortunate. Somebody sent to me recently a program from the 1929 U.S. Open, which we haven't had around here, I guess, since 1929. Here is a picture of 1940 at the U.S. Amateur at Wingfoot of Bing Crosby on the left with Craig Wood down by the first tee. Here is a picture of Claude Harmon with all his assistants, which are all well known. I mentioned their names to you earlier. Here's a picture of Bobby Jones sinking the famous 12-foot putt, and so forth. There are many photographs in the clubhouse, and we welcome you to take a look. Doug has visited the golf course with some of the photographers, and perhaps you'd like to tell the audience what you've seen. And
well, I might just mention Don March, when he referred to the article by Brendan Gill, who's a staff writer on the New Yorker magazine and has written many, many fine things, and books, The Definitive History on Frank Lloyd Wright and so on. When he wrote that article that Don referred to about how he admired the trees, it appeared in it appeared in Architectural Digest, which, as you know, is one of the most prominent publications in the world. international in its circulation. So it is, again, a tribute to Wingfoot that this fine writer would have singled out our course to talk about and to refer to the trees. Just this year, Lynx magazine, which this is their first national issue. They have been a regional publication before. And this, you'll see in the cover on it, is Wingfoot. It's our 17 West fairway. And there's a very fine story in here. Again, the picture that we have right here appears in it. A picture of Tommy Armour, which we have here, appears in it. It's a very interesting picture of the old boy. Everybody around him in the +4s, that they call them, the knickers, you know, that's what they call them, the +4s. So this was a very handsome story. And they loved this picture so much of Tommy Armour that I just held up here, that yesterday I received a phone call from the editor down in South Carolina. Said they want it again because they're going to feature it in another story that's coming up. This one of Tommy Armour. Right here we have the World Encyclopedia of Golf. And I invite you to come up and take a look at this. This was published in England, and it has all the great golf courses in the world. They break them into those that are really super, and include Wingfoot in it, and then those that are just super. But the point is that it's, Wingfoot getting this kind of recognition in the World Encyclopedia of Golf that came out just 2 years ago. The things that we find in going around and taking the pictures today is a reminder of this great fact that you should keep in mind, and particularly those of you who play golf will appreciate this. The Wingfoot courses, both of them, are considered classic examples of the strategic concept of golf, as opposed to penal. Those that are penal are those that penalize you. That's the word comes from, because you get into trouble, you can't get out. The beautiful thing they always said, to Tommy Armour, Mike Suchak, Craig Wood, Claude Harmon, and everyone said, the beauty of this golf course is that you can recover. That is, when you're playing it, and that is the result of the strategic concept. And in these publications here, that point is brought out continuously.
What is the difference?
Well, the penal, as I say, you can follow just about one line. And if you deviate from that line very far, you're in trouble, and you're penalized for it. In the strategic, let's say you can recover. You can be off of that line, right or left, a certain degree. You can't be off in the rough or too much, or off in trees or in the gorse in Scotland like they have. But the whole concept of the strategic is you've got some room to maneuver. You can recover. That's the best way to describe it right there.
Thank you, Doug. Just a few more photographs which I came across. Here's a picture of Craig Wood with a golf club, and behind him is, in the center, is Claude Harmon. Both are former professionals at Wingfoot. Here's a picture of Ben Hogan, who won the 1946 Goodall tournament at Wingfoot, which I mentioned earlier. And finally, here's another photograph at a later date of Tommy Armour seated with a golf club in his hand. And finally, Wingfoot Golf Club is very, very pleased to announce that we have been selected to host the 1997 PGA tournament here at the club. That's all I have personally. And Doug, would you like to add anything more?
Only this thought again on the PGA. You may have seen the article by Rick Remsnyder in the Gannett suburban newspapers when it was announced about a month ago that we would have the PGA tournament here in 1997. And he made a great statement out of it in his column, the article that day, in which he said that this was now his favorite tournament, even more than the U.S. Open, and went on to explain why he felt that way about it, the way it was attracting the kind of golfers that it did and the kind of play that was being achieved there. So I think for our own purposes at Wingfoot, the way we regard it so happily to have it is that we have had the Open, we've had the Seniors Open, we've had the Ladies Open, we've had the Anderson tournament over all those years, we've had the Amateur in the past, one of our own members winning it, as Billy mentioned, so that you really are rounding out, you might say, the whole spectrum of tournaments, top tournaments. So you'll notice today, if you look at those of you who are familiar with this, the PGA tournaments are going to the very finest golf courses in the country today. This past year at Inverness in Toledo, Ohio, outstanding golf course. And that's just one example of how prestigious the PGA is becoming and why we're very happy to have it here at Wingfoot in '67.
1997. 97.
1997. Thank you very much. Yeah, 30 years late.
We've gotten some fine assistance from Gloria in the back, and from your former president of the Mamaroneck Historical Society, Bert Megan, who tells me that many years ago he, as a Boy Scout, used to camp out on the grounds here at the club. So that's all the information that we have, and we're always looking for new information if anybody has any. Where
did the name come from? Wingfoot.
Where did the Wingfoot name come from? Well, it's the wing and the foot is the insignia of the New York Athletic Club. We added to it, we have a golf ball behind the wing and the foot as part of our logo with two golf clubs, an iron and a wood, running through the entire crest itself.
Mr. Morley would like to just hold up a few original 1904 period campaign pieces and an earlier piece from Alton Parker, which he used when he ran for Chief Judge of the state of New York back in 1895.
A cigar band.
A cigar band that's 96 years old. And right on it, it says Chief Judge, which means he did win the election, and it says Kingston, New York.
By the way, cigar smoking is prohibited in this dining room.
I just want to present to the club tonight something that Gloria Pritz was able to uncover today. She has Alton Brooks Parker's obituary.
Oh, really?
So she has typed this up, and we'd like to give this to Wingfoot to have.
Thank you very much.
Some of you may recall that in October of 1992, the name Alton Parker was not a household word in Mamaroneck. I had uncovered the fact that he at one time had lived in Mamaroneck and had run for the presidency, and it came as a great surprise to the community that we actually had a native homegrown presidential candidate, so to speak. And what I'd like to do now is give to the club a compilation of election results from the 1904 election, including local returns, which shows that Alton Brooks Parker and Henry Davis received 437 votes in Mamaroneck, and Teddy Roosevelt and Charles Fairbanks received 533. So Mamaroneck was still a Republican town in 1904, and I'd like to give this to them.
Thank you.
They did well.
And I'd like to give each of these gentlemen a copy of Mamaroneck from colonial times through the first part of the century of the Republic.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yep.
And even older than that is a copy of the 1936 Mamaroneck Through the Years book written by Bill Fulcher.
Right.
Great.
Great. That's terrific.
Yes. Wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
That's our way of saying, and Mamaroneck's way of saying, thank you for being part of our community. Thank you very much for a wonderful program. Thank you very much for sharing your history with our wonderful community.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Wingfoot's oldest employee in terms of tenure is Joseph Della Porta, known as Mo to all of us. Mo started work here in 1928. Mo was a very valuable man at Wingfoot and much loved by the entire membership.